when we came up with these roles, with the support of the head of school, obviously we then had to really sit and think about, well, what does this mean to be a liaison between an EAP centre and an academic school? How are we going to describe this in a role description? And that was a really useful exercise because we had to sit and think about the nature of this often quite invisible and very complex work. So you can have a look there and see some of the things we came up with. See if you think we covered the main things. Is anything missing? Um, yeah, I'll let you have a little look. So one key thing to notice is that one of the roles of the liaison can be providing support to module conveners or lecturers on discipline specific provision within their basket of schools. So in our model, being a liaison is a distinct role from module convening a discipline specific provision. Both of those roles exist as quite separate things. Um, Sometimes it lines up quite nicely. For example, the Department of Applied Linguistics, I'm the liaison for them. I'm the module convener for the embedded module. I teach the module. And there are lots of other instances where it lines up neatly like that. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the liaison is one person, but because they have many modules within their schools, somebody else is the module convener. And then you can even have a scenario where other people again are doing the teaching. So we really had to kind of think carefully about distinguishing the liaison role, which is about building those links and those contacts with departments, from the module convener role. The module convener role is set at a university level. The university has plenty of descriptions of what that involves. So it was the liaison we really had to focus on. It's not a hierarchy. It's not liaison, module convener, lecturer, because it crosses over. You can be a liaison in one school and be module convening in another and vice versa. So it is a little bit complicated, and that was one of the challenges we had of kind of unpicking that to start with. But I think this was a really valuable piece of work that we did, um, distinguishing these roles, and then crucially, getting this liaison role in our own workload model. So capturing all the work that it takes to build these kind of relationships and nurture them and keep them going, and then assigning hours to that and getting it in a model and making it more visible. That was really key. A major step for us, which sounds very kind of, I don't know, procedural, but has been really important, is that we gained a standing invitation to all boards of studies. So every program in the university, I'm sure it's similar in most places, is overseen by a board of studies, which is around quality assurance. Because we get invited to these boards of studies, we can send papers, we see all the other papers. It's given us a huge insight into the workings of the departments that we're trying to collaborate with. And it's given us parity with colleagues in the library, study advice, careers. It's also enabled us as a sideline to build relationships with those colleagues as well. So starting to break down some of the nervousness that was around the potential of overlapping roles and stepping on each other's toes, particularly, to be honest, between ourselves and study advice. Over the years, at points, that relationship had been quite challenging because there was a feeling of perhaps, how can I put this? Yeah, perhaps stepping on each other's toes at some points, or not understanding each other's remits, or presenting kind of confusing messaging to departments. There was all of this sense at various points. And actually going together to these boards of studies and being able to talk to the departments, but also talk to each other and clarify these roles has been hugely, hugely helpful. So this kind of really small procedural thing has made a big, big difference to us. So yeah, this is just a kind of a summary at this point of some of what we feel the positive aspects of the liaison model have been. Um, I think I've covered most of these actually, the sort of the information sharing, the relationship building, the capacity building. For me as the program director, this has also been very important because the liaison work now, the building of the relationships between ourselves and the schools can be more devolved, which frees up time for more strategic, forward-looking work, and also means that we are building the capacity of the team in terms of the leadership of in-sessional provision. More people are gaining insight into how different aspects of EAP management and leadership take place. More people are getting to experience the wider procedures of the university, which I think is also really important. So it's been very useful in that respect. I'm just looking at a comment in the chat about a problem with the sort of the use of different terminology often between EAP departments and the wider university. And yet this is something that we've tried. We've gone down the route of trying to align our provision as much as possible to the terminology that the university uses. That also has pros and cons because sometimes what we're doing doesn't quite line up in that way. But it does mean that there's a shared terminology and sort of expectation around certain roles. I think we're possibly getting to the point. Ah, yes, no, this was another thing I wanted to mention before we do any chatting. Um, when I looked back at this talk, I realized I'd called it Beyond the Individual. And I'm not so keen on that title now. I see it a few months later. I feel it has a slightly sort of sinister sound now that I revisit it. The idea of this model is certainly not to suggest that um, those individual relationships between ourselves and the departments are not important. Of course they are. Of course, individuals nurturing relationships between themselves, that is key. What we've tried to do here is capture that sort of bottom-up approach of networking with people and bring it together with a more sort of top-down management. What am I trying to say? A sort of management endorsed role procedural aspect of the liaison role, which has helped raise our visibility and our status. It shortly after we introduced this model, the um, the university went into a period of portfolio review, another review, and there was a threat to our non-credit provision. The university decided it didn't like the idea of non-credit modules and wanted to just get rid of them in a blanket way. And because we had increased our visibility, our sort of embeddedness through this much more official sounding way of business partners and liaisons and bosses, it put us in a better position to push back against that, to resist that. So that was very useful for us and was an aspect of the kind of future proofing that we're interested in capturing here. So yeah, so I think it's at this point that if it's possible, it might be nice to get into um, some breakout rooms and have a chance to share some experiences, some ideas, because obviously what I've presented is very, very contextually based. And so the question I'd like to ask really is what frameworks or structures that exist in your institution do you already plug into? I'm sure there's a lot, or that you could kind of piggyback onto if you're not already. Um, I've got a Padlet we can potentially add ideas to as well. I don't know if I can put that link in the chat. And then I think we're going to go into breakout rooms. Is that okay?
That's more than okay. Yeah, I'll pause. So that's the recording back up, and we'll hand as people come back into it from breakout rooms, which we're handing back to Sarah for the next phase of things today. Thanks, Sarah. Whenever you feel, whenever we're ready.
So hopefully everybody got to have a little bit of a chat in the breakout rooms. I'll post the Padlets again at the end, and then if people want to add to them later on, um, they might be quite useful to come back to. Those Padlets should last there, but hopefully you all got to have a little bit of a chat about structures in your particular institutions that might be useful. Um, if there's anything you want to put in the chat as well, please do. I'll keep going because we've got another kind of sharing activity to do. And I think kind of sharing in plenary on this one, because it's so contextualized, is perhaps not the most useful. But I think that the next activity sort of lends itself a bit more to sharing all together. So up until now, we've been talking about our liaison model. A couple of points while we were in the breakout rooms, we were talking about that I can clarify. Within this model, we are still based, our liaison team, our insessional team, we're all still based together in our centre, in our EAP centre. It's not a model whereby we're actually sitting within the schools. And that's because, as you might have seen from our website, some of our colleagues are liaisons across a number of different schools. And they're also doing this alongside other aspects of their role. So what we call a full basket of liaison activity, Reading likes baskets. So a full basket of liaison activity we consider to be 0.25 of a role. And then people will be doing teaching and other responsibilities, perhaps on pre-sessional alongside this. We also have colleagues who have um, a smaller liaison basket, so they might have a proportion of a liaison basket. So you can see we've kind of really drilled down into trying to quantify something and get it into our workload model. And yeah, kind of piggybacking on these structures that exist across the university. I think a kind of important contextual thing as well is that at Reading, at the University of Reading, the the what they what the university refers to as kind of support services like careers, study advice, the library are very, very well embedded, very highly regarded, and very quickly get a seat at the table of anything to do with T&L. And so what we're trying to do is make sure we get that seat alongside them from our, in this case, slightly awkward positioning, in fact, as an academic school. So